Like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon. We will take up a new short story today, which is The Little Match Girl. And before we start off with the story, like always, let us go to the background of the author first. The author of the story is Hans Christian Andersen, and he was a Danish writer best known for his fairy tales, it says. However, his stories are not restricted to children alone. Now, before I go ahead, let me just talk about what fairy tales are. Fairy tales are those stories which generally tend to have a happy ending. It generally ends with a sense of optimism, a sense of positivity, right? However, his stories are not restricted to children alone and have themes of universal appeal that transcend age and culture. Transcend means that surpasses, that goes beyond age and culture, and it has a universal appeal that is kind of appealing to everyone in the universe, be it of any religion, any country, any nationality, anything. They will find some association, some relation with his stories. Andersen had a very unique childhood, and much of his stories reflect this sadness, dealing with loss and death. Now, he was a Victorian author, and Victorian age in literature, the Victorian era, which kind of spans from say 1835 till about 1901. So that period when the Queen Victoria was the Queen of England, we tend to call it the Victorian age in English literature. Now, that age is symbolic of the crude realism and the crude reality of the society. It's evident in most of the writings there. Matthew Arnold, Charles Dickens, you name it, it's there. So he could not come out of that, and he adhered to that format, and it says his stories reflect the sadness, dealing with loss and death. Why? Because there is a loss of faith in that era. People are all vying for prominence, vying for development, even if it means going away from your close ones, even if it is breaking bonds and kind of unshackling of kind of cages that had contained you for ages. Victorian era saw it breaking apart. The Little Match Girl is one such story that deals with loss and death, set around Christmas. Now, although the story actually occurs on the last day of the year and the following morning, that is the first day of the new year, but it says set around Christmas, because we have to understand that Christmas is all about festivity. It's about happiness, it's about enjoyment, merrymaking, and there is light and glitz and glamour and warmth everywhere. So it kind of spans from the 25th till the 1st. That whole week in Europe is a week of festivity and a spread of warmth and happiness. So, set around Christmas, the story tells of a little girl who, unable to sell her matchsticks. Well, we'll come back to this a little later. Let us first now go to the beginning of the story. Yes, the Little Match Girl, it says, it was bitterly cold. We straight away jump into the story and the description of the ambience, the environment, the weather. It is not at all pleasing and pleasant. We can very well associate the winters of Europe, the winters of England. Snow, rain, cold, and that's the norm. So it was bitterly cold. Cold that was bitter, and snow was falling, and darkness was gathering, for it was the last evening of the old year. It was the last evening of the old year, means this was the 31st of December. last evening of the old year. So the story is beginning in the last evening of the old year. Why old year? Because the story ends in the new year. It was the New Year's Eve. Everyone all around in this story, in this setting, everyone is now looking at the clock for it to strike 12, when they can absolutely burst open with shouts of laughter and wishes and, merrymaking, wishing each other a happy new year. Everyone is waiting for that. And the story begins at such a situation. It says, in the cold and gloom, a poor little girl walked, bareheaded and barefoot through the streets. Significant. First, poor little girl. It could have just said poor girl. It could have just said little girl. But no. The girl is being described with additional words and adjectives, poor, little, to kind of give us an image of what kind of a girl it must be, who is poor and who is little, and in that cold, bitterly cold, as it has already been described in the first line, it says the girl was walking bareheaded and barefoot. And bareheaded, it is obviously nothing to be very shocked, shocked about in India, in our country. But this is Europe again. We have to understand, this is their Christmas, their winter. And you have to keep something to cover up your head. Otherwise, the snow, the cold is going to give you a headache, make you fall sick. So in that ambience, in that environment, such difficult times, this little girl, poor little girl, is walking on the street bareheaded and barefoot, nothing there, no proper shoes, no proper socks to keep her warm. It says she has been wearing slippers. We all know what slippers are. She has been wearing them. And it is true that she has been wearing slippers when she left home. But what good were they? What would that be, that help? How would a slipper help her to kind of counter the extreme bitterly cold? There is a question, a rhetorical question being asked. They had been her mother's. Now understand the irony. It's not even her slippers. It belongs to her mother. That kind of enhances the poverty that this girl's family is subjected to at this moment. She does not even have a slipper of her own. She has taken her mother's and now she is wearing them. So you can imagine how big they were. Obviously, a little girl wearing her mother's slippers, it will obviously not fit her. So it will flap out every now and then. And let's see what happens. The little girl had lost them as she ran across the street to escape the two carriages that were being driven terribly fast. Now she had come out of her home for something, we'll get to know that. And she had lost those two slippers. She had lost them as she was running to cross the road. Why? Because she had seen these two carriages that were being driven terribly fast. So to save herself, she runs faster, and in that motion, she lost a slipper. Now, one slipper could not be found. She looked back, she was searching for it. It was not there. You slowly start to feel a little bad for this girl, that she did not have anything. She was poor, she was little, she was bareheaded, barefoot. At least she had the slippers, and now she's losing that too. So one slipper could not be found, and a boy had run off with the other. Now there is a mention of a boy. We don't know what is his age. We don't know whether this boy is known to that little girl or not. We don't know that this boy is a complete stranger. But this boy has run off with one of the slippers and she could not find the other one. Irony. saying, now the boy who ran off with the slippers, the boy says, it would come handy, it would come in very handy as a cradle someday when he had children of his own. My goodness. There is a child, a little girl, who is kind of trying to fight out, to eke out a living, to somehow survive the cold. And there is another boy who could be her own age, and he playfully steals or takes away the slippers. Why? Because he feels he can use it as a cradle when he would have children of his own in the future. So one girl here, the little girl, is thinking about today, thinking about now, thinking about the present, how to deal with the cold, how to keep her body warm. And there is this boy who has stolen her slipper ruthlessly, who is thinking way, way, way into the future. A future that the little girl can never ever aspire dreaming of. Why? Because she is more bothered about the present, what will happen to her today. That is the irony about it. Yes, let's not expect the boy to be very, inhuman or something like that, because it's a boy. He's a child. So he just stole it and he runs. Let's not get into that, too deep into it. If it would have been a man, an elderly man, then it would have made sense. How dare he, when he could have saved that little girl, provided the girl a little warmth, how dare he run off with the slipper. But this is a boy, a small boy. So let's not get into all that. Now, the next paragraph, it says, so the little girl walked about the streets on her naked feet. Now, she had at least the slipper in the first two paragraphs. Now, she has lost them also. And she walked about the streets on her naked feet, it says, which were very important, red and blue with the cold. While answering questions, you have to be very, very attentive and pay deep attention to all these descriptions that are there. All the visual images that have been really worked upon and created. The story is rich in imagery and symbols. We'll get into that later on. So, her feet had become red and blue with cold. In her old apron, she carried great many matches, and she had a packet of them in her hand as well. Now we get into the real truth behind her existence and her coming out into this cold. She had come out, why? Because she wanted to sell these matches. Back in the Victorian era, people were not allowed to, beg and all that. So just to see that they could have food on their plate, food on the table, everyone, especially the people belonging to the lower strata of the society, they made a point that even the children in their families, they go out and they earn something so that they can use it to feed themselves. And none of the children back then were treated as children. They were treated as adults. So even though the children were children physically, their eyes and faces did show a sort of pain, a sort of humdrumness, a sort of gloom, grimness. Right? It was back about that society. It was about the people back then. We cannot help it. And the little girl is a victim of that. Nobody had brought any from her. Nobody had brought any of those matches from her. She was wanting to sell them and nobody was buying it. And no one had given her a single penny all day. Such, crude reality. No one was giving her any money, but it was the last day of the year. They were all preparing and waiting for the new year. Everyone was happy. No one even looked at the little girl trying to sell the matchsticks. No one showed any trace of pity, any sympathy to towards her. Okay? She crept along, very important. When do you creep? You creep when you don't have any physical energy, any physical strength and power left in your body to walk, to tread and to trot. That is when you creep, not being able to walk steadily and erect. She was creeping. Why? Important, underline. It says she was shivering and she was hungry. The picture of misery, poor little thing, very important words and phrases that describe the little girl. It can very well come as a 4-mark question. Why? Because it talks about her creeping along, first point. Second point, she was shivering and hungry. Third point, she was a picture of misery. Definitely, she was a picture of misery, of course. And the last point, she was attributed, she was given the tag by the author as being a poor little thing. The little match girl of the title is now slowly unraveling itself. We are trying to and getting to know its real symbol, its real significance. Let's continue. Then it says, the snowflakes fell on her long golden hair, which curled so prettily about her neck, but she did not think of her appearance now, obviously. She is a picture of misery. She is a poor little thing. She does not have anything to eat. Why? Because it says she was shivering and she was hungry. So what? The snowflakes fell on her golden hair and she was looking very beautiful maybe. She was looking like a doll maybe. But it did not have any meaning to her. She did not have a mirror to appreciate her. Why? Because she was burning with hunger. She was shivering with cold. Who cares as to how she looked? Lights were shining in every window. So my life is dark and it's gloomy. It's really, really bad. And to contrast it, I see everyone else is actually celebrating. There is light, there is celebration, there is happiness, there is smile. So it says, lights were shining in every window and there was a glorious smell of roast goose in the street. For this was the New Year's Eve and she could not think of anything else. She was hungry, she was shivering. It was the new year, and what does she see from every window? Lights. New Year lights, Christmas trees maybe. And the smell of glorious roast goose, which is a luxury for her. She can never ever aspire to eat it. But she's getting the smell. Auditory image. It's making us imagine, think, and realize in what a real crisis this little girl must have been. And ironically, on which day? On the day when everyone is preparing for a new year, for a new beginning, for a new resolution, for a new life. This girl here is thinking about one penny, one small meal, one small cloth or one small cap to shield herself from misery, from coldness and from hunger. That's what it is. She huddled in a heap in a corner formed by two houses. Now, what is huddle? Huddle means when you crouch yourself this way to kind of occupy the very smallest of places. It's like there is a shell and you go and enter into the shell. That is what huddling means. So she huddled herself in a heap in a corner formed by two houses. Why? Because she wanted to warm herself, somehow defeat that bitter cold that was everywhere, enveloping her. Right? So she huddled down in a heap in a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected further out into the street, it says, than the other. So there were two houses. There were two houses. One was this, and another one projected out into the street. So she occupied this small space here, right? Maybe because she wanted to shield herself from the very harsh winds, cold winds. So she occupied that space. And it says, but though she tucked her little legs up under her, she felt colder and colder. Slowly and gradually, the cold is penetrating her body, her skin. And even though she is trying her best to make her as closely knit kind of mass as possible, yet she is unable to do so. Why? Because she is feeling colder and colder with time. She did not dare to go home. This is important now. By now we would have imagined, why is this little girl suffering so much? She must be having a home. That is why she is selling matchsticks. You better go home, dear. That is the kind of advice that every sane man would have given her. But she cannot go home. Why? Another reality, crude reality. It says she cannot go home, for she had sold no matches and earned not a single penny. Now we know everyone is here a sufferer. The fate, the fortune does not support every individual. This girl here is leading a life that is full of gloom, that is depressing and sad and melancholic. She cannot go home because she has not earned a single penny. There is a compulsion, there is a condition in place that she has to adhere to. So it says, her father would be sure to beat her, and besides, it was so cold at home, for they had nothing but the roof above them, and the wind whistled through that, even though the largest cracks were stuffed with straws and rags. We may say, please go home, but according to her, it's not a home. Her home had nothing to protect her from the winter, from the wintry cold. And she had a father who was very, very strict with her, almost inhuman. Why? Because he would beat her if she returned without selling the matchsticks, without any penny. And it describes the picture of the household. They had nothing except a roof, and that too, the largest of holes were stuffed with straws and rags. Means it could be that there are many other smaller holes from where snow was falling. So what kind of a home it is, she must be imagining. What is the use of going back? It's as cold there as it is here. At least my father will not be able to beat me, she must be wondering. Her thin hands, now physical description, one after the another. We get to see the visual images craftily created by the author. It says her thin hands were almost numb with cold, senseless, it was growing numb. Thin hands, why thin? Because she is a poor little girl. How can she be healthy? She cannot. It's a thin hand that was growing numb. And if she only dared pull just one small match from the packet, strike it against the wall and warm her fingers. It talks about what she can do, but she cannot willfully do that because she has to obey to the instructions of her father. That is why it says, if she could do that, if she could take the match out, strike against the wall and then warm her fingers, that would kind of ease that numbness she feels. You know, such a dilemma. You have food, but you cannot eat it, and you are dying of poverty. Imagine what it must feel like. She is going through that same crisis. And she is not an elderly woman. She is not an experienced, lady. She is a poor little girl a little girl of her age who should be there in a comfortable sofa, in a comfortable bed, making New Year resolutions, writing poetry and drawing cartoons, and then having a really happy time with her family. Why? Because everyone is awaiting the New Year. But the crude reality is she is there outside on the street. When everyone is celebrating, she is just, in a very numb manner, waiting for something. Because she is not able to do anything on her own. Nothing at all. She pulled out now. She could not wait anymore. She was thinking, if I could. Now such is the compulsion to save herself, save her numb hands, that she pulled out a match and scratch how it spluttered and burned, how it burned in flames, exhibiting those flames, spluttering of flames, it says. It was a warm, bright flame, like a tiny candle when she held her hand over it. It was like a tiny candle when she held her hand over it. Why? To warm her hands. But what a strange light. There was something strange with the light, however. Why? Because it seemed to the little girl as if she was sitting in front of a great iron stove with polished brass knobs and brass ornaments. This is the first vision that the girl sees. It was just a normal match. But after having lit that match, the girl sees a vision. And what is the vision? The vision is that of a great iron stove, right? Something where you actually light to kind of make a room warm. There was a great iron stove, and there was a great iron stove with polished brass knobs and brass ornaments. Brass is an alloy made up of copper and zinc. So she sees these brass ornaments and brass knobs, and there was this great iron stove, something that you cook on, maybe any dish. So she sees that in a vision. The fire burned so beautifully and gave out such lovely warmth. Obviously, when you are in a desert, thirsty, and someone comes and gives you a bottle of water, you will feel that it's nothing but heaven. Nothing could compare that feeling with anything else. Same goes for her. And she sees that fire and how lovely warmth it was exhibiting. Oh, how wonderful that was! Exclamation mark. How wonderful the fire was, the girl must be thinking. The child had already stretched her feet to warm them too. Now, after having warmed her hands, she stretched her feet to warm them, when out went the flame, the stove vanished, and there she sat with the burnt match in her hand. So all that was remaining was the burnt match. Rest of it was all gone with the extinguishing of the fire, with the extinguishing of the match. She struck another. She did not want to wait. She struck another one. After having struck the first one and seen the iron stove and brass knobs and ornaments, now she wants to strike another. Let me see. So the first vision, very significant. She was in a bitterly cold state. She sees an iron stove and brass ornaments, which indicates warmth, which indicates a contrast to her bitterly cold state and numbing sensation. So that is a symbol of warmth. Warmth that kind of everyone's homes are providing at this moment. the second match. We see a second vision now. Let us see. She struck another, it burnt clearly, and when the light fell upon the wall, the bricks became transparent. She is going through another vision now. Like gauze, she could see right through the room. So the wall became transparent and she could see through the room as to what was happening inside. And what did she see? She saw that there was a shining white cloth spread on the table. It was covered with beautiful china. China is the cutlery, the china ware. And in the center of it stood a roast goose. Mind you, the smell of roast goose had already come through the air and she had already smelt it. Now she's seeing it. So the hungry child is now in the second vision seeing a roast goose, which is symbolic of, first one was warmth, the second one now is that of hunger, something that can defeat her hunger. So it was a roast goose stuffed with prunes. Prunes are plum, and apples steaming deliciously. It was steaming, hot, so tempting. And the girl sees that. And what was even more wonderful was that the goose hopped down from the dish. Now imagine when you don't have something and you want it desperately, you tend to see these things in your imaginations, in your dreams, because you're so desperately wanting them. Same goes for the girl. She sees the goose hop down from the table and waddle across the floor with a carving knife and fork in its back. Waddle means to move this way, right? And waddle right straight up to the poor child. Imagine the poor little girl is here and the roast goose waddles right up to her with a spoon and fork on its back, as if to say, please come, I'm here for you, eat me. This is what you were waiting for. This is the new year that you were looking for. As if. Then out went the match and nothing could be seen but the thick cold wall. So when this was almost there, the goose was almost there and the child was almost about to hold it, the match again extinguishes and back again to the crude reality. She struck another match. She did not stop there. She struck another match and suddenly she was sitting under the most beautiful Christmas tree. Hunger, symbol, complete with the second vision. First vision, warmth, complete. Now it is what the world is celebrating. What is it? It is Christmas. So somewhere the little girl connecting with the larger world, at least in her dreams. She sees a Christmas tree, a beautiful Christmas tree. It was much larger and much lovelier than the one she had seen last year through the glass doors of the rich merchant's house. Now understand this and understand the significance of the line. She had seen a Christmas tree the last year, and that too from outside the glass doors of a rich merchant's house. That was her vision of the Christmas tree, and she remembers that vision that she had seen, that sight she had seen from outside the glass door for one whole year. And this Christmas now, after she lights the match, she sees a beautiful Christmas tree. And she says, it says, 1,000 candles lit up the green branches. The Christmas tree that she was now seeing in her vision after having lit the match. In that Christmas tree, there were 1,000 candles that had lit it up, the green branches. And gaily colored balls like those in the shop windows looked down upon her. Shop windows, something that she has seen in the shops. She never had the luxury to go and buy them. She's seeing all these in the Christmas tree, in the vision, in her imagination. The little girl reached forward with both hands. Then out went the match. So almost she was there. She could touch it, but cut. The match goes. The many candles on the Christmas tree rose higher and higher through the air, and she saw that they had now turned into bright stars. Very important. The visions start from land, from the iron stove, from the roast goose, then to a Christmas tree. Now the Christmas tree moves up and it is now converted into a star, into stars. So slowly the story, slowly the thoughts of the little girl is now transcending her petty, her humdrum existence. She is going beyond what she is suffering from. She has left her surrounding and she has gone up. Her vision, in her head at least, she is now seeing the stars. Remember, very significant. One of them fell, streaking the sky with light. So one of those stars, they fell and it streaked the sky with light. That is when, very significant, the first dialogue, the first line where a character speaks is said after 2.5 pages of the story. And what is it? Now someone is dying, said the little girl. For her old grandmother, the one who had ever been good to her, but who was now dead, had said, whenever a star falls, a soul goes up to God. Her grandmother, who is no more with her, but she is the only one who loved her, that woman, that lady had told her once that whenever a star falls, a soul goes up to God. And as the little girl sees the star break and streak the sky, she remembers her words and she says, now someone is dying. Note how she could have spoken about anything. She could have spoken about, oh my God, how beautiful it is. She talks about dying. And after having spoken about death, she instantly thinks about her dead grandmother as the only individual, the only human being, the only person in her life to have loved her truly. Otherwise, in her existence, the lifeless, the colorless, dull, gloomy, humdrum existence, no one loves her today. Let's continue. She struck another match on the wall. Once more there was light. Now she was very much attuned, accustomed to it. She knows now what is the phenomena. Each light she'll see a vision. That is very common to her now. Sure. So she lights another match, and in the glow stood her old grandmother. As soon as she thinks about her grandmother's face, the grandmother's words, after having lit the light, the old grandmother is there. Oh, so bright and shining and looking so gentle, kind and loving. The adjectives are very important. These things come. How did the little girl describe the grandmother? So you have to write bright and shining, looking gentle and kind and loving. You may be asked, what was the first thing that she told her? What was the first expression that she communicated to her? So you have to say, Annie, cried the little girl. Oh, take me with you. I know you will disappear when the match is burnt out. You will vanish like the warm stove, the lovely roast goose, and the great glorious Christmas tree. Reality dawns on the child. She is now complaining to the grandmother that, Granny, please take me with you, because I know you will disappear soon like the ones that have already disappeared before you. So emotional, so touching, so moving. Yes? And then she quickly struck all the rest of the matches. She did not wait anymore. She struck all the rest of the matches in the packet, for she did not want to keep her grandmother with her. For she did so want to keep her grandmother with her. She did not want her grandmother to disappear anymore. So now that girl who was so very, nervous and anxious of her father beating her if she does not succeed in selling the matchsticks, now without a thought has burnt all her matchsticks. The matches, it says, flared up with such a blaze that it was brighter than broad daylight. Such was the blaze after having lit all those matches that it was brighter than broad daylight, and her old grandmother had never seemed so beautiful or so stately before. Her grandmother was looking so beautiful and so stately. It's like, someone belonging to a really high position, like a queen sort of. That was the sight of the grandmother. Okay? She took the little girl in her arms and flew with her high up, oh so high, towards glory and joy. Now they knew neither cold nor hunger nor fear, for they were both with God. So this is where the story takes a real shape and a climax. They could now be free of fear and hunger and cold. Why? Because her grandmother, unlike all the other visions, her grandmother took her and up she went towards joy and towards contentment. So even if the poem started off with bitter cold, with very dark description, painful images, now it has really taken a shape of an optimistic end. Why? Because the poor little girl, has succeeded in meeting with her grandmother, the woman who truly loved her, and she was looking so stately, and both of them, they went up towards joy, towards God. Now, but in the cold dawn, now this is the next morning, all that happened in the previous night, before the new year maybe, this takes place in the new morning, that is the new dawn, the 1st of Jan obviously. But in the cold dawn, in the corner formed by the two houses, remember the two houses? In that corner formed between the two houses sat the little girl with rosy cheeks and smiling lips, dead. She was smiling, her lips were, out in a smile, and she had rosy cheeks, but critically and hard-hittingly, this little smiling girl was dead and frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. The old year is symbolic of her old life. The life of gloom, the life of misery, the life of pain, the life of darkness, the life of absolute depression and tediousness. All that she has left behind, because that is old now. She has, with the new year, with the new dawn, kind of transversed and passed on to a new life, a new existence, with love, with her grandmother's company. The dawn of the new year rose on the huddled figure of the girl. See? The dawn of the new year, the rays now falls on the girl. So ironical, the same rays, the same dawn, which she was really waiting for to provide her warmth, was not there the last evening. Now, after she dies, the nature itself tries to awaken her. Here, hello, are you alive? As if She was still holding the matches, and half a packet had been burnt. Half a packet of them had been burned, and she was still holding the matches, and there was a smile on her face. She was evidently trying to warm herself, people said. And these are the people who kind of gathered the next morning. Very important. Because these very people were there in the previous night, in their homes, celebrating, awaiting the new year. None of them looked at the little girl. None of them wanted to show her any warmth. None of them wanted to buy those candlesticks. The matchsticks. But these men now, they gathered around. Why? Because this poor little child has died. So they say, she was evidently trying to warm herself. But no one knew what beautiful visions she had seen, in what a blaze of glory she had entered with her dear old grandmother into the heavenly joy and gladness of a new year. So old and new, very significant. Everyone else's lives, hardly anything changed. But for the for the little girl, old year was so tough. Existence was so difficult. Survival was a fight. And in the new year, she is happy, and she is in the heavenly joy and gladness, her new home, in the company of her lovely, warm grandmother. That is what the story is. Now let me just briefly talk about the symbols. The new year here is a symbol, of course. Why? Because it is, as I told you, the beginning of the new year and the new life for the little girl. It is the new year, and the new life is there starting up in heaven. So the new year is a symbol. Last evening of the old year is also a symbol. Why? Because it was the last of her dark days. It's like as if you do something and you have to bear that torture for the last 1 hour, and after that you are free. It was that moment in her life. Next is that the story transcends all ages and cultures. That is evident in the title of the story, The Little Match Girl. There is no name of the girl. There is no name of the place. There is no name of the street. There is no name of the boy who took the slippers. There are no names of the people who commented on that huddled dead figure. There is no name, which gives the story a universal appeal. Why? Because every individual in Africa, in America, in India, in Europe, in any part of the world will be able to relate to the little girl's suffering, because there is poverty everywhere. There is a lack of warmth everywhere, and there is this inherent human need to search for that particular thing that you don't have, which is why the visions, which is why the dreams. And another thing that I would like to add is the story, every bit takes place in a third person narrative. We don't know. He's an omniscient narrator. He's not introduced himself. He only knows about the little girl, about her family, about her home, about her father and the grandmother. And all he does is narrate in the third person. As far as dialogues are concerned, they are very few, and short stories must have dialogues. And the first dialogue, as I told you, it was, "Now someone is dying." And that phrase was spoken by no one else but the little match girl. And interestingly, ironically, her words become a reality, because the very next moment she dies. She goes up. Thank you.